when Black families created their own holiday. The story of Kwanzaa and what it really meant. There was a time in the late 1960s when many Black families started celebrating something that hadn't existed before, something that belonged entirely to them, rooted in African tradition but born in America out of a need for cultural connection and pride. From December 26th through January 1st, 7 days of candlelight and celebration, families gathered to honor principles that spoke to who they were and who they wanted to become. Kwanzaa wasn't about competing with Christmas or replacing any religion. It was about creating space for Black people to celebrate their heritage, to teach their children about African values, to build community around shared culture and collective aspirations. If you grew up in a Black household in the 1970s or 80s where Kwanzaa was celebrated, you remember the Kinara with its 7 candles, the decorations in red, black, and green, the discussions about unity and self-determination and collective work. You remember feeling connected to something ancient and something new at the same time, to Africa and to the struggle for Black liberation in America, all wrapped up in 7 days of reflection, celebration, and hope for the future. Do you remember the first time your family celebrated Kwanzaa? Maybe your parents had just learned about it from friends or community organizers, excited about this new tradition that centered Black culture and values. Maybe you came home from school one December to find your living room transformed with African-inspired decorations, a kinara placed prominently on a table covered with beautiful cloth, ears of corn representing the children in the family, a unity cup for sharing, and gifts that emphasize creativity and heritage rather than commercial consumption. Maybe you were confused at first, wondering what this celebration was and how it related to Christmas, which you might have also celebrated. But as your parents explained the meaning behind each symbol and each principle, you began to understand that Kwanzaa was giving your family something precious, a way to celebrate being Black that wasn't filtered through white culture or European tradition. Kwanzaa was created in 1966 by Dr. Maulana Karenga, a professor and activist who was deeply involved in the Black Power movement. The year 1966 was significant. It came after the Watts riots in Los Angeles, after years of civil rights struggle, at a time when many Black people were looking for ways to build power and pride within their own communities. Karenga wanted to create a holiday that would bring African American families together around African values, that would provide an alternative to the commercialization of Christmas, and that would reinforce cultural identity and community bonds. He drew from various African harvest festivals, particularly from the Swahili-speaking regions of East Africa, to create something new that honored the past while addressing present needs. The word Kwanzaa comes from the Swahili phrase matunda ya kwanza, meaning first fruits of the harvest. In agricultural societies across Africa, harvest festivals were times of celebration, gratitude, and community gathering. Families would come together to give thanks for the harvest, to share the abundance, to reinforce social bonds, and to pass down cultural traditions to the next generation. Karenga adapted this concept for African Americans, creating a harvest festival of culture and community rather than crops, a time to gather the fruits of collective struggle and celebrate Black achievement and aspiration. The celebration is built around the Nguzo Saba, the 7 principles, each represented by a candle on the Kinara and celebrated on one of the 7 nights. These principles aren't just abstract concepts, they're values that speak directly to the Black experience in America and the ongoing struggle for liberation and self-determination. Umoja, meaning unity, is celebrated on the first night, December 26th. It emphasizes the importance of togetherness in family, community, nation, and race. For Black families who had been divided by slavery, segregation, and economic displacement, unity was both a value to aspire to and a practical necessity for survival and progress. Kujichagulia, celebrated on the second night, means self-determination, the ability to define yourself, name yourself, create for yourself, and speak for yourself rather than being defined and spoken for by others. This principle resonated deeply with Black people who had spent centuries being defined by white society, being told who they were and what they could be. The principle of self-determination was at the heart of the Black Power movement. and celebrating it during Kwanzaa reinforced its importance to children growing up in Black families. Ujima, collective work and responsibility, is the third principle. It emphasizes building and maintaining community together, solving problems collectively, and taking responsibility for each other. For Black communities that had always relied on mutual aid and collective support to survive in a hostile society, this principle named and honored what they had always practiced. It taught children that their success was connected to their community's success, that they had responsibilities beyond just themselves and their immediate family. Ujamaa, cooperative economics, is celebrated on the fourth night. It encourages building and maintaining Black-owned businesses and supporting them so that wealth stays within the community. This principle spoke directly to economic empowerment and the importance of Black economic self-sufficiency. For families celebrating Kwanzaa, discussing Ujamaa meant talking about where they spent their money, why supporting Black businesses mattered, and how economic power could translate into political and social power. Nia, purpose, is the fifth principle, focusing on the collective vocation of building and developing Black community to restore Black people to their traditional greatness. This principle is about having a sense of mission, understanding that individual lives are part of a larger historical struggle, and committing to work that uplifts the entire community. For young people hearing about Nia during Kwanzaa, it planted seeds about living purposefully and connecting personal success to collective advancement. Kuumba, creativity, is celebrated on the sixth night. It encourages using creativity to make the community more beautiful and beneficial than it was inherited. This principle honors the artistic and cultural contributions that Black people have always made, from music and dance to literature and visual arts. It teaches that creativity isn't just about entertainment, it's about building culture and leaving a legacy for future generations. Imani, faith, is the seventh and final principle, celebrated on December 31st, New Year's Eve. It emphasizes believing in Black people, parents, teachers, leaders, and the righteousness and victory of the Black struggle. This principle provides spiritual grounding and hope, teaching that despite all the obstacles and oppression, there are reasons to believe in the possibility of justice and the eventual triumph of the struggle for liberation. Each night of Kwanzaa, families would gather around the kinara, a candle holder that holds 7 candles, 3 red on the left representing struggle, 3 green on the right representing the future and hope, and 1 black candle in the center representing Black people themselves. On the first night, the black candle would be lit while the family discussed umoja, unity. On subsequent nights, additional candles would be lit in a specific order, alternating between red and green, until all 7 candles were burning on the final night. Do you remember the ritual of lighting the candles? How everyone would gather, often after dinner, and someone, maybe the oldest child or the parent, would light that night's candle while explaining the principle it represented? How you'd discuss what that principle meant in your lives, sharing examples of how you'd practiced it or how you could practice it better. These weren't just abstract philosophical discussions. They were practical conversations about how to live, how to treat each other, how to build stronger families and communities. The symbols of Kwanzaa each carried meaning that families would explain to their children. The mkeka, a woven mat, represented tradition and history, the foundation on which everything else rests. All the other symbols were placed on the mkeka, just as the present is built on the past. The kinara itself represented African ancestry, the continental source of Black people in America. The muhindi, ears of corn, represented children, 1 ear for each child in the family, symbolizing the future and the importance of investing in the next generation. The kikombe cha umoja, the unity cup, was used for libation, pouring liquid to honor ancestors and affirm the connection between past, present, and future. Families would pour libation for the ancestors, acknowledging those who came before and sacrificed so that current generations could have opportunities. This practice connected African American families to African traditions of ancestor veneration, teaching children that they were part of an unbroken chain stretching back through slavery to Africa itself. The zawadi, gifts, were given primarily to children on the last day of Kwanzaa, January 1st. But these weren't supposed to be commercial, expensive gifts like Christmas presents. The emphasis was on gifts that encouraged growth, learning, and cultural connection. Books, art supplies, African clothing, educational games, handmade items. The goal was to reward children for commitments they had made and kept during the year, to encourage achievement and responsibility rather than just material consumption. The celebration also included African-inspired decorations throughout the home. Red, black, and green, the colors of the Pan-African flag, appeared everywhere, in tablecloths, wall hangings, clothing. African art, masks, sculptures, and textiles decorated the space where Kwanzaa was celebrated. Some families wore dashikis, kente cloth, and other African or African-inspired clothing during the celebration. The visual transformation of the home created an immersive experience, surrounding children with symbols of African heritage and Black pride. Many families held a karamu, a feast, on December 31st, the sixth day of Kwanzaa. This communal feast brought together extended family, friends, and sometimes the broader community for a celebration that included traditional African-American foods, performances of African music and dance, poetry reading, and storytelling. The karamu was a highlight of Kwanzaa, a joyful gathering that embodied the principles of unity, collective work, and creativity. Children would perform, adults would share wisdom and history, and everyone would eat together, reinforcing the bonds of community. If your family celebrated Kwanzaa in the 1970s and 80s, you were part of something relatively new but rapidly growing. The celebration spread through Black communities, particularly in urban areas and among families involved in Black nationalist and Pan-African movements. Schools in Black neighborhoods began teaching about Kwanzaa. Libraries displayed books about it. Community centers hosted celebrations. It became a marker of Black cultural consciousness, a sign that a family was connected to the broader movement for Black liberation and self-determination. But Kwanzaa wasn't universally embraced in Black communities. Some Black families, particularly those with strong Christian identities, were suspicious of a holiday that wasn't rooted in Christianity, and that seemed to compete with Christmas. Some saw it as too political, too radical, too connected to Black nationalism. Others thought it was artificial, a made-up holiday without authentic roots, trying to create tradition where none existed. These tensions played out in families and communities, with some celebrating enthusiastically, others rejecting it entirely, and still others finding ways to incorporate Kwanzaa alongside Christmas and other holiday traditions. For children growing up in families that did celebrate Kwanzaa, the experience was formative. You learned Swahili words, the names of the principles, the symbols, greetings like Habari Gani, what's the news, and responses naming the day's principle. You learned about African culture and history, not just the history of slavery, but the history of great African civilizations, kingdoms, and achievements. You learned to see yourself as part of an African diaspora, connected to people across the globe who shared African ancestry. You learned values that emphasize community over individualism, collective responsibility over personal gain, cultural pride over assimilation. The celebration also taught practical skills. Many families incorporated craft activities into their Kwanzaa celebrations, making their own mankika mats, creating African-inspired art, learning traditional African games and stories. Children learned to speak in front of groups by participating in the nightly candle lighting ceremonies. They learned about planning and organization by helping prepare the Karamu feast. They learned about generosity and community by participating in service projects and charitable activities that many families incorporated into their Kwanzaa observance. Kwanzaa provided an alternative model for celebration that wasn't centered on commercial consumption. While American Christmas had become increasingly commercialized, with success measured by how many and how expensive the gifts were, Kwanzaa emphasized values, relationships, and cultural connection. Families who felt uncomfortable with or couldn't afford the commercial aspects of Christmas found in Kwanzaa a way to celebrate that aligned with their values and their means. The emphasis on handmade or educational gifts, on family togetherness, on reflection and discussion, created a different kind of celebration. The holiday also created opportunities for entrepreneurship and cultural production within Black communities. Artists and craftspeople created and sold Kwanzaa sets, kinaras, makikas, unity cups, and other items. Publishers produced books about Kwanzaa for children and adults. Musicians created Kwanzaa music. The celebration generated economic activity that kept money circulating within Black communities, embodying the principle of ujamaa, cooperative economics. Over the years, Kwanzaa evolved and spread. By the 1980s and 90s, it had become more mainstream within Black communities, with celebrations happening not just in homes, but also in schools, libraries, community centers, and even corporations looking to acknowledge Black employees and customers. The commercialization that Kwanzaa was partly created to resist began creeping in, with stores selling Kwanzaa cards and decorations alongside Christmas merchandise. Some people welcomed this visibility and accessibility, while others worried that the original meaning and purpose were being diluted. For many Black families, Kwanzaa became a complement to Christmas rather than a replacement. They would celebrate Christmas on December 25th with religious services, gift-giving, and traditional foods, then transition to Kwanzaa on December 26th for a week of cultural celebration. This combination allowed families to honor both their Christian faith and their African heritage, to participate in mainstream American holiday traditions while also maintaining distinct Black cultural practices. The 7 principles of Kwanzaa influenced how families thought about their lives and choices throughout the year, not just during the celebration. Parents would reference the principles when teaching children, encouraging unity when siblings fought, emphasizing collective work and responsibility when it was time to do chores, discussing self-determination when making decisions about education and career. The principles became a framework for Black cultural values, a language for talking about what mattered and why. Schools in Black neighborhoods began incorporating Kwanzaa into their December curriculum, teaching students about the holiday's history and meaning. This institutional recognition helped solidify Kwanzaa as a legitimate cultural celebration and exposed children whose families didn't celebrate at home to the concepts and values it represented. Some schools held Kwanzaa celebrations, inviting families to participate in candle lighting, performances, and feasts. The holiday also created intergenerational connections. Grandparents who remembered life in the segregated South could talk about the importance of unity and collective work during those times, connecting the principles to lived experience. Parents could discuss the changes they'd seen and hoped to see, relating the principles to current struggles for justice and equality. Children could imagine the future they wanted to build, understanding their role in the ongoing work of Black liberation. Critics of Kwanzaa pointed out that it was a created tradition, invented in 1966 rather than passed down through generations. But supporters argued that all traditions were created at some point, and that Kwanzaa's recent origin didn't make it less meaningful or valuable. They noted that it drew from authentic African traditions even if it wasn't itself ancient, and that it met real needs for cultural identity and community building in the African American context. The celebration also faced criticism from some quarters for its association with Maulana Karenga and some of his controversial views and actions. Karenga's past legal troubles and some of his statements over the years became fodder for those who wanted to discredit Kwanzaa. But many families separated the holiday from its creator, arguing that Kwanzaa had taken on a life and meaning beyond any one person, that it belonged to the communities that celebrated it and shaped it to their needs. For young people who grew up celebrating Kwanzaa, the experience often instilled a strong sense of Black identity and pride. They learned to see Blackness not as a deficit or a problem, but as a rich cultural heritage with values, traditions, and history worth celebrating. They learned about Africa not as a primitive backward place, but as the cradle of civilization, the source of knowledge, culture, and strength. These lessons countered the negative messages about Blackness that surrounded them in mainstream American society. The celebration also taught young people about the diversity within African and African American culture. Learning about different African regions, languages, traditions, and histories showed that Africa wasn't a monolithic place, but a continent of tremendous diversity. Learning about different approaches to celebrating Kwanzaa across the African diaspora in the Caribbean, South America, Europe, showed the global reach of Black culture and struggle. As those children who celebrated Kwanzaa in the 1970s and 80s grew up and had children of their own, many chose to pass the tradition on to the next generation. They modified and adapted the celebration to fit their family's needs and circumstances, just as traditions naturally evolve over time. Some kept elaborate, formal celebrations with all the traditional elements. Others simplified the observance to focus on what mattered most to them. Some blended Kwanzaa with other holiday traditions in creative ways. Today, Kwanzaa is celebrated by millions of people, primarily but not exclusively African Americans. It has become an established part of the American holiday landscape, recognized alongside Christmas and Hanukkah as a significant end-of-year celebration. Whether observed formally or informally, privately or publicly, Kwanzaa continues to serve its original purpose, bringing Black families together around values that strengthen community, connecting people to African heritage, and creating space for Black culture to be celebrated on its own terms. Looking back, Kwanzaa represented something important that emerged from the Black Power movement of the 1960s. The understanding that political and economic liberation needed to be accompanied by cultural affirmation and psychological decolonization. It wasn't enough to integrate into white institutions or achieve legal equality. Black people needed to build their own institutions, define their own values, and celebrate their own culture. Kwanzaa was one manifestation of that understanding, a concrete practice that families could engage in to express and reinforce Black pride and self-determination. For those who celebrated it, Kwanzaa created memories that lasted a lifetime. The warm glow of candlelight, the discussions about principles and how to live them, the special foods and decorations, the sense of connection to something larger than yourself, these experiences shaped identity and values in profound ways. Even people who no longer actively celebrate Kwanzaa as adults often carry with them the lessons and values they learned during those 7 days each year of their childhood. Did your family celebrate Kwanzaa? What do you remember most about the celebration? Which of the 7 principles resonated most deeply with you? How did Kwanzaa shape your understanding of Black culture and identity?